Hey guys, it's Sophie. So I needed to do a book review with you today. It's rare that I read a book and immediately just feel like I have to talk to you about it, and this is absolutely one of those books. So I read When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. I started it the day before yesterday and finished it yesterday evening, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it, and just really wanted to share it with you and to invite you all to read it too. So just a little bit about this book. This is a non-fiction book. It's very short, about Paul, who was a pretty brilliant man, had a whole host of different degrees from very prestigious universities, went through the sort of medicine track, ended up going into neurosurgery and neuroscience, but at the age of 35 he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and this book is about him dealing with his upcoming death. So it's a pretty hard topic already, but as you guys know, normally difficult topics don't really hit me all that hard, but this book hit me really hard. I cried 3 times when I was reading it, and I cried twice in public. I cried in my office, at work, over at lunch, and I cried in the gym. So yeah, it was a pretty strong stuff. So a little bit more about it just in general. I think that the voice that Paul writes with is really strong. I think for me it was quite sort of impactful because he has a mix of really enjoying English literature and really enjoying science. It's a relatively rare sort of combination of interests, but it's one that I certainly share. So it's very interesting to see how he was relating the sort of philosophy of literature to the sort of scientific method, and speaking about those two things in tandem, and how he was reconciling his need for logic and order with his need for the sort of emotional aspect of literature. I think he wrote about his experiences very well, and I think that he did a very good job at putting across exactly what was happening and the way that he was feeling at certain times. I think what made it such a hard-hitting book for me is it deals with one of my deepest fears, which is not like lung cancer, but it's the concept of a conscious death. So just to explain a little bit more, it's always been something that sort of fascinated me and makes me feel a bit weird at the same time. It's one of the reasons why I'm always really interested in serial killers, and in the experience their victims must have when they're aware that they are essentially helpless to death that is being inflicted on them by a third party. I used to write to prisoners on death row who had a very similar kind of experience. Yes, obviously they have done bad things, but they're in a situation where they're facing their death. It's either set with a date or it's unsure. You don't know whether the appeals are going to go through, but you know that you are going to die in the near future. And this book kind of touched on it too. I think it was particularly impactful because the individual obviously understood his death very well, and you could sort of tell how really that makes no difference. I think there's a little bit that needs to be said about me and death and my philosophy of death in general, to explain a little bit more about this for you. It's going to differ from everyone. Obviously I recommend it, but it will probably make you think a fair bit. So just for me personally, I never really used to be afraid of dying. No, that's not even completely true. I didn't really understand how people could be afraid of dying. As you know, I was quite unwell for quite a long period of time, and to me it was far more scary to imagine getting up in the morning and going outside than it was to imagine just not being there anymore. So I've sort of come to the concept of mortality kind of late. So it's something that I'm exploring in my 20s as opposed to really in my childhood, where most people sort of do experience it and sort of come to terms with their immortality. So as I got better, it was a very odd sort of transition between death being kind of a close friend, to something to run from or something to try and ward off. That was never something that was in my mind previously, and the concept of dying one day was something I welcomed. I didn't fear it. I don't think I am sort of terrified of dying now. I think it is an eventuality. I think it's a certainty. I tend to think of it as the opposite of before you were born. That's the way that makes most sense to me. You know, there's no stress or worry or pain or confusion around where you were before you were born, so it's just the same. Like, you're not going to be there anymore. I don't believe in sort of religion or spiritual aspects, so I just figure it's just a non-existent state the same way as it was previously. But there is something about that state in between that I find really powerful to read about, really powerful to try and understand and to communicate with people who are in that space, where death is imminent but not certain, sort of time-wise, and it's how to deal with the fact you have a very limited amount of time left, but not exactly how much time you have left. Because I think if you sort of know, if you have a date, and the people I've written to on death row who have been put to death, when they gain a date, they tend to gain quite a lot of acceptance, and the fear goes away. Essentially, it's something that's going to happen, and they only really seem scared again the day before. But up until that point, they are relatively calm about it. But I think it's the expectation of it that freaks me out. So, going back to the book again, I pretty much haven't stopped thinking about it since I finished reading it, and the way it sort of plays into my own relationship with death. And I just think that's brilliant. It's by far the best non-fiction book I've read this year, and tentatively at the moment it's a bit early to say, but it may be the best book I've read this year. It's so fresh, and as you can tell I'm still kind of like shaken up about it, so I am going to need to give it some time. But in terms of emotional impact, yeah, it's definitely the most emotionally impactful book that I've read this year. Tell me if you've read it down below, tell me if it had a similar sort of effect on you, or if you're interested in reading it, then again, please comment down below and just let me know. I'd like to be able to chat about this with you guys, and see what your experience has been with it. So thank you ever so much for watching. No, it was a bit of a tougher video, so well done for sticking around, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye bye.